Welcome to another case from the mind of Nero Wolfe, the brilliant, immovable detective, and his sharp-eyed right hand, Archie Goodwin. This time, a brother's death uncovers a decade-old secret, a vanished will, and loyalties that weigh heavier than guilt. It's a mystery of silence, betrayal, and the high cost of truth, and you're just in time to witness it unfold. So, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you now? Prepare yourself, because this is a story where justice hides in the quietest corners, and not everyone walks away clean. Vivien Broden arrived at precisely 11 minutes past 11, announced only by the knock of her gloved hand against the front door. She declined Fritz's offer of tea, stepped into the office with the kind of poise that suggested practiced sorrow, and stood without waiting to be seated. Wolfe's eyes flicked upward from the American Orchid Society bulletin, then dropped again. I, as usual, stood to the side, notebook in hand, though I had a hunch I wouldn't be writing down much of what followed. "Mr. Wolfe," she began, her voice smooth but faintly brittle, "I'm here to ask you not to take a case." Wolfe raised an eyebrow, not in surprise but in mild irritation. "I take no cases before hearing what they are." "This one hasn't been offered yet," she said. "But I suspect it will be. I'm asking you to decline, should it come." Her hair was the kind of brown that photographs badly, too dark for light, too warm for shadow, and she wore a black coat not suited for the season. Her posture belonged to someone used to authority, or at least access to it. I leaned back on my heels. Wolfe laid the bulletin aside. "You are, madam," he said, "unaccompanied, unsummoned, and evasive. I dislike all three." "My name is Vivien Broden. Perhaps that will help." "It does not," Wolfe replied. "Your request is an oddity. You ask me to decline a hypothetical case, one not proposed, one not defined. That strains both logic and patience." She inhaled slowly, her hands clasped tight around the handle of her purse. "The man who may come to you, Douglas Neal, is the younger brother of my former fiancée. His brother, Henry Neal, died last night. An accident. The police were clear on that." "Then why?" Wolfe asked, eyes narrowing. "Do you suppose Mr. Neal would seek my services?" Her lips parted, then pressed closed again. "Because Douglas doesn't believe it was an accident, and because he'll do anything to turn this into a scandal." Wolfe turned his head toward me. "Archie, fetch a chair." That meant she was permitted to stay, though not necessarily welcome. She sat down, only after I brought the chair forward, and gave her a nod. She didn't thank me. Her mind was elsewhere. "Henry was found at the bottom of his apartment stairwell," she said. "The super called it in after the housekeeper couldn't reach him. The medical examiner said the fall snapped his neck instantly." "No evidence of foul play?" Wolfe asked. "None that mattered," she replied. "There was a spilled drink, one broken glass, but Henry drank scotch every night, and the police concluded he likely missed a step." "Yet you fear Douglas will insist otherwise," Wolfe murmured. "Why?" "Because," she said, her eyes locking onto Wolfe's, "Douglas has always resented Henry. For being successful, for being loved, for being the older brother, but most of all, for not defending him 10 years ago when the scandal nearly destroyed their family." I didn't have to look at Wolfe to know he was filing that away. Vivien leaned forward. "Henry was a good man, Mr. Wolfe. Private, thoughtful. If there's any question about how he died, it shouldn't be decided by Douglas, and it certainly shouldn't be fueled by someone as thorough as you." Wolfe's expression didn't change, but I knew that look. She'd just handed him a provocation on a silver tray. "Did you love him?" Wolfe asked flatly. Vivien's fingers flinched against her purse. "I was to marry him once. We ended things civilly. And yet you fear his brother's inquiry more than the prospect of his killer walking free?" She didn't answer, but the answer was written across her silence. Wolfe rose a quarter-inch in his chair, his equivalent of a shrug. "I appreciate candor, Miss Broden. I regret its absence. I've told you what matters. Number, you have told me what you fear matters. She stood, purse clenched. Then I'll leave it at that. You would do better to leave nothing, Wolfe replied. But it is not my habit to argue with the voluntarily ignorant. Her chin lifted. You enjoy cornering people, don't you? I enjoy clarity, he said. It is rare and usually arrives only when someone's pride has expired. She gave a stiff nod, turned, and left. I waited 5 seconds after the front door shut before raising an eyebrow. That was subtle for you. She was more interested in controlling the narrative than mourning the dead, Wolfe said. It may be a useful distinction. Do you want me to follow her? He didn't answer. He simply glanced toward the office window. That was yes. I didn't tail her in the usual sense. There was no point. She was likely headed straight for a cab and out of view. Instead, I took a stroll to the sidewalk, leaning near the curb just in time to see her slip into a waiting black sedan. But someone else was watching. A man, 30s, lean build, with a collar too high for the weather, stood across the street, hands in his coat pockets, staring after the car as it pulled away. He didn't make a move to follow. He didn't need to. His attention wasn't passive. He stood there long enough for it to be noticed, then turned and walked west, not checking to see if anyone was watching him. I memorized his gait, the slope of his shoulders. Something about the way he walked suggested a man used to rehearsing speeches, or regrets. Back in the office, Wolfe didn't look up when I returned. Interesting character across the street, I said. Too clean for a junkie, too stiff for a PI. Watched Miss Broden leave like she owed him a past. Wolfe looked at the orchid nearest his elbow. Did he notice you? I'm charming but not obvious. That remains to be proved. I started to quip back, but before I could, the doorbell rang again. Fritz showed him in a moment later. The man who entered was the same one from the sidewalk, but in closer view he looked older, not by years, but by nights unspent in sleep. Mr. Wolfe, he said. Wolfe inclined his head. My name is Douglas Neal. I need your help. My brother is dead, and no one seems to care why. I stood beside my desk, arms crossed. Wolfe gestured faintly. Be seated and begin. Douglas sat stiffly. He didn't waste time. They're calling it an accident. They're wrong. Henry wasn't the type to fall down a flight of stairs unless he was pushed, literally or otherwise. Do you suspect someone in particular? Wolfe asked. No, Douglas said. Yes, I don't know, but I do know this. My brother was about to change his will. He was going to put things right. That's not hearsay, he told me. Finally. And someone didn't want that will to take effect, Wolfe said quietly. Douglas nodded. What did your brother need to make right? Douglas looked straight at Wolfe. A lie? One that's been allowed to rot for a decade, one that ruined both of us. Then you seek justice? No, Douglas said, voice cracking just slightly. I seek the truth. Let justice figure out what to do with it afterward. Wolfe didn't speak. His fingers formed a steeple. I waited. After a long moment, Wolfe looked toward me. Archie, he said, open the casebook. And that was that. Wolfe's rule about not leaving the brownstone was second only to his rule about not indulging trifles. And by his initial sniff at Douglas Neal's request, you'd think the matter belonged squarely in the latter camp. But I'd seen him hesitate, just for a flicker, when Douglas mentioned the will. That hesitation widened the door, and Wolfe, like any man addicted to precision, disliked open doors left unexplored. The clincher came 3 hours later when Wolfe called me into the office, laid aside a volume of Pliny, and said, Mr. Neal is not merely persistent, he is connected indirectly to Ambrose B. Jarrett. That raised my brows. Jarrett was an old client of ours, and not the kind whose name you invoked lightly. He sat on 3 boards, financed 2 galleries, and could close a bank with 1 phone call. What's the connection? Henry Neal managed one of Jarrett's overseas portfolios until 2 years ago. Discreet, Profitable. Mr. Jarrett regarded him as competent. I whistled. And now he's dead at the bottom of his own staircase. Yes, Wolfe said, and his brother believes it was neither stumble nor coincidence. I dislike being used, but I dislike secrets more. I opened my notebook. Shall I call Saul? Do. Have him meet you at the apartment. Use civility with the building superintendent, and flattery only as necessary. Report what you see, not what you suppose. I made the call, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. Wolfe didn't look up. Archie. Yes. If the will is truly misplaced, find out who benefits from its absence. That is the hand most likely to have removed it. Henry Neal's apartment building on the Upper East Side looked like every other block of quiet money and wary neighbours. Saul was already leaning against the wrought-iron banister when I arrived, coat buttoned, eyes half-lidded. The super's talkative, he said, and the neighbours upstairs have long ears. We took a slow walk through the corridor, pausing by the stairwell where Henry had met his end. The banister had been freshly cleaned, too freshly. I made a note of that. Inside the apartment, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and regret. Saul spoke with the precision of a man accustomed to filtering truth from chit-chat. According to the woman in 5B, there was shouting the night Henry died, not a drunken rant, a deliberate argument. One voice. Male. And the police? Dismissed it as domestic, said it matched the timeline up around 11. Saul had already mapped out the place with his eyes. No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle either. But someone was here, I said. Besides Henry. He nodded. Someone he knew. I made my way to the living room, where a row of framed photos sat neatly above the mantel. Henry, with business associates, 2 shots of him yachting, and one of him younger, arm around a boy I took to be Douglas. The frame on that one was dusty. We checked the door locks, the windows, even the trash. Saul noted a footprint on the inside threshold, heel turned outward. Someone leaving in a hurry. Size 9, likely a man. When we left, the super watched us from the corner of his eye. I told the cops everything, he said. I smiled politely. Of course you did. There are 2 things you can always count on in the home of a bachelor with money: liquor and something personal left half-finished. In Henry Neal's case, the scotch bottle on the sideboard was half empty, with a single glass beside it, cracked, and not by accident. A second glass was missing altogether. 2 people drank here, I told Saul, or 1 poured for 2. Saul grunted. The glass cracked cleanly, not dropped, gripped too hard or knocked against something. I turned to the desk in the corner. The drawers were mostly tidy, paper clips, ledger paper, a few monogrammed envelopes. But one drawer, second from the top, sat slightly ajar. Inside was a small stack of personal letters, half shuffled, and one addressed, unsent, to Vivien Broden. No will. Do you think someone searched it? I asked. Someone who didn't know exactly what they were looking for, Saul replied, or someone pretending not to know. I left the drawer the way we found it, closed the desk, and stood for a moment in the center of the room. Henry had something to say that night, I said, and someone didn't want him to say it. Or someone made sure no one else ever would. By the time we returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was comfortably engaged in rejecting a veal dish Fritz had proposed for Thursday. When I laid out what we'd seen, the broken glass, the shifted drawer, the neighbour's testimony, he didn't blink. Saul is certain the footprint was male. Distinctly, 9, maybe 9.5, right boot heel worn. Good. Then we speak to the lawyer. James Corwin arrived precisely at 6, after a brief but pointed summons. He was the kind of man who polished his spectacles when nervous and over-articulated every third word. His handshake was dry, his suit impeccable. I was Henry's attorney for 7 years, he told Wolfe, and friend for longer. Then you are doubly useful, Wolfe said. Tell me, did Mr. Neal discuss making changes to his will? Corwin blinked. Well, yes, there had been recent conversations. Nothing formal, nothing filed. Did he tell you who he intended to benefit? Corwin hesitated. He spoke of amending certain portions, including his brother, possibly replacing the primary beneficiary. Who is currently? Wolfe asked, though we both already knew. Vivien Broden. Wolfe folded his hands. Yet you say nothing was finalized. Correct. We were scheduled to meet later this week to begin formal revisions. And you never saw a draft? No, Corwin said too quickly. Only notes, nothing official. Wolfe studied him like a chessboard. Mr. Corwin, I find your tone evasive and your memory selective. You may be a competent legal advisor, but you are a poor liar. Corwin flushed. Wolfe continued, I dislike wasting time. Either the will exists or it does not. Corwin adjusted his glasses again. It may have existed, as a draft, possibly stored at Henry's apartment. I cannot be sure. Then I suggest, Wolfe said icily, you begin remembering. Corwin cracked. It didn't happen instantly, but Wolfe's silence had a way of fraying defenses. Finally, Corwin sighed, sat forward, and rested his hands on his knees. Henry had a new will, he admitted. I helped him draft it. He intended to sign and notarize it later this week. It named Douglas Neal as his primary heir. Vivien was removed entirely. And where was this document kept? Wolfe asked. In a manila envelope, inside the top left drawer of his desk. The same drawer, I said, that was found open and half ransacked. Corwin nodded miserably. It was there as of 2 days ago. I saw it with my own eyes. But it was gone after the police arrived. Apparently so, he said. I didn't go looking for it. That would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. Wolfe exhaled slowly. Someone removed it. Someone who knew where to look, knew what it was, and wanted it gone. Corwin swallowed. Yes. Who knew of its existence? Just Henry, myself, and Vivien. I met Wolfe's gaze. There it was. The first real nail in the coffin, or at least the first clear fingerprint on the handle. Wolfe didn't speak for a long moment. Then softly, Mr. Corwin, pray you are not withholding anything further. I have very little tolerance left for professional negligence dressed as discretion. Corwin said nothing. But Wolfe, I knew, was already 3 moves ahead. There's something about bachelors with money. They either surround themselves with photographs of themselves looking important, or they go the opposite route and strip their walls bare. Henry Neal had leaned toward the former, with a few framed pieces on the mantel, and 1 or 2 black and white shots on his bookshelf that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. But it wasn't the displayed photos that caught my attention. It was what had fallen behind the bookshelf, or rather, what had been wedged behind it deliberately. It was the edge of torn photographic paper, jagged as if ripped from a frame, only the corner visible. I reached in and pulled it free. The photograph was damaged, but not beyond recognition. A woman's face, slightly turned, lips parted. An image caught mid-thought. She was striking in the way very few women are when unaware they're being watched. I didn't recognize her, but someone had gone out of their way to hide her, not discard her. The back of the photo had nothing. No name, no date, just a faint smudge of oil where it had likely once been pinned or pressed. I tucked it into my jacket pocket and gave the room another glance. The desk had been disturbed, the Scotch bottle half empty, but this wasn't about evidence. This was personal. The kind of thing people bury when they're trying to forget they once felt something. And that meant the lady in the picture wasn't just someone Henry knew, she was someone who still mattered enough to be erased. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was slicing into a peach with deliberate, almost surgical strokes when I handed him the photograph. He peered at it over his glasses and raised one brow. This is not Vivien Broden. No, I said. It's someone else Henry kept tucked away, literally. Wolfe didn't speak. Instead, he handed the photo back and reached for the phone. 3 calls and 1 favor later, we had a name, Dalia Kessler. Art consultant, independent, smart, unmarried. The next morning, I met her at her loft in Soho. She was dressed in grey slacks and a silk blouse, the kind of outfit that looked accidental, but probably cost more than my monthly rent. She didn't blink when I showed her the photograph. "Yes," she said. "That's me." "Where did you find it?" "Behind a bookshelf, torn, carefully hidden. That usually means someone had trouble letting go, or someone else wanted to pretend it never existed." Her smile faded. "Henry and I were involved for 6 years, quietly. He kept me out of society's eye, said it protected both of us." I didn't comment on the fairness of that arrangement. "Why the secrecy?" "Vivien," she said simply. Even after they separated, she was influential. Henry wasn't the sort to invite unnecessary scandal. "Were you still seeing him recently?" "Until 2 weeks ago," she replied. "Then he ended it." "Just like that?" "Number not cruelly. He said he needed to make amends. With Douglas, with his past. He said he couldn't carry 2 burdens anymore." That, I thought, was an odd way to put it. "I asked him if he meant Douglas," Dalia continued, "or something else. He said it was all the same thing." Her fingers twisted the corner of a napkin, not in nervousness, but in concentration, like she was choosing her words with care. That made me pay attention. "Henry felt responsible for what happened 10 years ago," she said. "You know about the scandal?" "I've heard whispers. Embezzlement, a family foundation, charges that were dropped." She nodded. "It was more complicated than the headlines made it seem. Douglas was the one accused, but it was Henry who took the heat. Voluntarily." "Why?" She hesitated. "To protect someone else." "Vivien?" She didn't answer, but her silence did. "Henry told me he was going to undo the lie. He didn't say how, only that it involved his will and that he needed to speak with Douglas face to face. He seemed relieved, like he was finally getting out from under a shadow." "And what about you?" She gave me a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Henry was a man of compartments. I was a chapter he was closing. I don't blame him, not for that." "Do you blame someone else?" She looked away. "I think someone blamed him." Wolfe, as expected, wasn't interested in Dalia's heartbreak, but he was very interested in what she hinted at next. "She never forgave Henry," Dalia had told me. "Not really, not after he tried to walk away clean." She, in this case being Vivien Broden, she claimed to want peace, to preserve reputations, but Henry said she was terrified he'd tell the truth, that she'd lose her position, her influence. "Do you know what truth?" Dalia's voice had dropped then. "Only that Henry wasn't the one who stole from the foundation, and neither was Douglas." That had raised the obvious question, but Dalia didn't answer it directly. Wolfe mulled that piece for a full minute. "If true," he said finally, "it suggests Miss Broden has more than grief to manage." "She has motive," I said, "but not the guts to push a man down a flight of stairs." "You underestimate the lengths to which fear will drive a person, Mr. Goodwin, particularly when that person is accustomed to being untouchable." "Then Dalia's in the clear?" "Hardly," Wolfe said. "She was close to the flame and chose silence. That makes her either cautious or complicit." "And if she's telling the truth?" "Then we must stir the pot, Archie. As with all stews, the meat sinks unless provoked." Wolfe made no direct accusations. That wasn't his style. Instead, he summoned me to the kitchen and requested Fritz's first edition notebook, the one with smudged pages and decades of annotations. I raised a brow, but fetched it. "Secrets," Wolfe said, not looking up, "are like onions in a stew. Left untouched, they soften and dissolve. But press the heat, and they rise. I assume you're not talking about lunch?" He gave me the look that meant I was not to interrupt the metaphor. That afternoon, Saul called in from his watch across from Henry's building. "She lied," he said simply. "Dalia. She was there the night he died." I straightened in my chair. Are you sure? She parked 2 blocks away, entered through the rear service door, stayed 15 minutes, left in a hurry. Did anyone see her? Just me? I reported to Wolfe, who merely nodded. One truth leads to another, he said, even if you must pull it by the roots. Getting hold of a dead man's diaries isn't as hard as you might think, not when you've got Nero Wolfe behind you and a probate clerk who owes someone a favour. The executor's office had locked up Henry Neal's effects in a tidy manila folder and passed them along with the kind of bureaucratic indifference that makes you wonder how anything ever gets lost or stolen. I brought the set of diaries home like a taxidermist handling a rare bird. Wolfe didn't touch them. He simply gestured to the couch and said, "Begin." Henry Neal had been a steady diarist, not compulsive, but methodical. Entries every other day, neat handwriting, mild editorializing, nothing dramatic, nothing poetic. I skimmed through June, then July. Business notes, quiet dinners, remarks about humidity and scotch. Then I hit the final week. The page for Thursday was intact. Dinner, alone, scotch, thinking of Douglas. Entry ends, Friday, gone. Cleaned here, no dog-earing, no shred of paper left behind, no accidental rip. It had been removed with care, precision, like someone had wanted only one specific thought erased. Wolfe, seeing my pause, said nothing. He never interrupts silence unless it's wasting time. "It's missing," I said finally. "The entry for the night he died." Wolfe closed his eyes. "That is not coincidence. That is intention. It narrows things. It complicates them," he said. "Someone removed a single page, therefore they knew precisely what it said, and feared it would be read, or feared it would be believed. That, I had to admit, was worse. Wolfe disliked theatricality, but he appreciated confrontation when it was constructive. He had me call them all, Vivien Broden, Douglas Neal, Dalia Kessler, and James Corwin, for what he called a clarifying exercise. That's Wolfe speak for an ambush with good chairs. They came like suspects in a parlour novel, though none of them wore guilt easily. Vivien was dressed in navy, hair perfect. Dalia came in subdued silk. Corwin looked like he hadn't slept. Douglas was the only one who didn't seem prepared for war. Fritz provided coffee, but no one drank it. Wolfe didn't rise. "You are here," he began, "because the truth has been arranged around Henry Neal's death with the finesse of a poorly played game of whist." Corwin shifted in his seat. Vivien stiffened. "Someone removed a page from his diary," Wolfe continued. "The entry for the night he died." "Why?" No one spoke. Wolfe waited, then let the silence stretch into discomfort. "You," he said to Vivien, "knew Henry kept journals." "I did," she said, voice controlled. "But I never read them." "Then you were more respectful than the person who removed the page." He turned to Corwin. "You saw the will in his drawer the day before his death." Corwin blinked. You told me. Do not now unsay it." "I didn't remove the diary page. I did not say you did." Wolfe paused, then looked at Dalia. "You visited the apartment that night. You claimed Henry was dead when you arrived. Were you lying?" "No," she whispered. "Then someone was there before you." Douglas leaned forward. "Then why won't any of them admit it?" "Because," Wolfe said, "someone in this room believes that truth is a threat greater than accusation." Vivien folded her hands tightly, resting them on her lap like someone bracing for recoil. "You seem very certain of my guilt," she said, voice sharp. "I am certain of your fear," Wolfe replied. "Whether it is guilt or shame remains to be seen. I didn't kill Henry. I did not accuse you of murder." Her gaze hardened. "Then what are you accusing me of?" "Knowing more than you've said, and benefiting from silence." She looked to Douglas, then quickly back to Wolfe. "What does it matter? He's gone. The will is gone. It's over." "No," Wolfe said, "it is not." "Henry was fragile," she insisted. "He'd been carrying too much. He was unraveling." "And you were concerned, so concerned that you came here before his brother did, begging me not to investigate. Vivien flinched. I came to protect his name. From what? She opened her mouth, closed it again. He loved you, Wolfe said quietly. Enough to lie for you. Once, but not twice. That cracked her armor. Her breath caught, her voice thinned. I didn't ask him to lie, not then. But you accepted it, Wolfe said. And when you feared he might undo that lie. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The foundation was called Neil Futures, a family endeavor founded by Henry and Douglas's father, meant to fund educational grants. 10 years ago, it nearly collapsed in scandal. Douglas had been accused of misappropriation, redirected funds, improper disbursements. The press had a field day, but no charges stuck. The family circled its wagons, and somewhere in that storm, Henry stood up and quietly claimed responsibility for poor oversight. The narrative was accepted, and Douglas, though bruised, was cleared. I called a contact at the city records office and dug deeper. Turns out the audit trail had gone cold right after the foundation's private records were sealed. But one memo surfaced, unsigned, never filed officially but copied. It pointed to a payment chain redirected into a consulting entity registered in a familiar name, VB Holdings. I didn't need a detective's license to guess what the initials stood for. Back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe the copied memo. Vivien Broden Holdings, I said. He examined it with a thin smile. Ah, so Henry not only shielded his brother, but the woman he once intended to marry. Why? I asked. Wolfe's fingers steepled. Because he believed the illusion of loyalty was more valuable than its truth. Some men confuse silence for strength. And now? Now, Wolfe said, we discover whether his silence was fatal. Douglas wasn't in the room when Wolfe examined the memo. I found him in the front parlor, hands behind his back, studying a bronze bust of Cicero with the kind of concentration usually reserved for confessionals. You knew, I said. He didn't look at me. Not at first, but later, yes. Henry told me the truth, about the foundation, about Vivien. Why didn't you say anything? He turned. Because he made me swear not to. Because he said it didn't matter anymore. He wanted to end the lie cleanly, change the will, step away. You believed he would? I think he already had. That caught my ear. You saw the new will? No, Douglas said, but he told me what was in it. He said he was going to make things right. Was he afraid? Douglas met my eyes. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of wasting another decade carrying someone else's guilt. Did you tell anyone he was planning to change the will? No, not even Vivien. His silence gave me the answer Wolfe didn't need to ask. It wasn't brilliance, it was laundry. Fritz had laid out Henry's robe for examination, a deep navy dressing gown lined with soft fabric and stitched in gold thread, the kind of garment that says wealth without ever speaking aloud. I ran my hand along the seams while Wolfe muttered about hand-stitching standards, and then I felt it. A slight bump under the lining, just inside the collar. I sliced it carefully and pulled out a folded slip of paper, creased twice, faded slightly at the edges. One line in Henry's handwriting. If she comes tonight, I must tell her the truth, and let it cost me what it will. I held it up. Wolfe took it, read it, and set it down. Prepare the room, he said softly. Tomorrow, we end it. Wolfe held the diary slip as if it were a verdict. He read the line again. If she comes tonight, I must tell her the truth, and let it cost me what it will. Then laid it flat on the desk like a final move in chess. It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The handwriting matched Henry's, and the ink, once dry and faded, was now a thunderclap across the timeline. He didn't speak at first. That was Wolfe's way when something confirmed what he'd already suspected. He called it confirmation, not satisfaction. That page, he finally said, was removed because it named no one, yet condemned someone. I took my seat. It's thin as evidence, but thick with implication. Henry Neal anticipated a visitor. one whose presence would force truth from concealment. And that someone was a woman. Yes, Wolfe said, but which? We have two, Vivien and Dalia. He glanced at me. Dalia's arrival was reactive. She found a body. Miss Broden, on the other hand, had cause to fear what Henry might say. I leaned back. You think she came? And that he told her? No, Wolfe replied. I think he didn't have the chance. That left a silence in the room. Mr. Goodwin, he said, we now must decide whether Henry died because of what he said or because of what he was about to say. Either way, someone made sure he never finished the sentence. Wolfe's theory, like most of his theories, unfolded in layers, deliberate, ordered, and built upon provable truths, not speculation. That morning, with the slip of diary paper in the center of his desk, he laid out what had become a working hypothesis. Henry Neal, he began, was expecting a visitor on the night he died. Likely Vivien Broden, though Dalia Kessler has admitted to entering the premises afterward. I nodded. He intended to confess something, or confront. Either would threaten her. The changed will was the mechanism, the diary was the motive's map. Wolfe's tone was neutral, but it carried weight. Now, he said, we apply the principle of reaction. You mean what someone did after he died? Precisely, the will vanished, the diary page was removed, the crime scene was subtly altered, enough to suggest that someone not only found him, but feared what he left behind. And the police? Dismissed it as accident, but police do not examine the emotional geometry of a death. I chuckled. Is that a real phrase? He ignored me. Henry's fall, he continued, could have been an accident, an altercation escalating in panic. But what followed was not panic. It was containment. That is the mark of calculation, not grief. And Vivien had both opportunity and motive. She had more, Wolfe said. She had history. It was Dalia who cracked first. She arrived that afternoon in a grey coat with eyes that had lost whatever steel had once held them upright. I took her to the office, where Wolfe sat behind his desk with the discipline of a man who waited for liars to find their way into the truth. I went to see him, she admitted. That night. You claimed otherwise. I was afraid. Of being accused. She nodded. Of being near it. Of knowing too much and saying too little. You found him? Yes, she said. On the floor. At the bottom of the stairs. I don't know how long he'd been there. You touched nothing? I touched him. Tried to see if he was breathing. Then I ran. Wolfe frowned. Why did you go to him that night? He asked me not to come, said it would be too hard. But I had to. I wanted to say goodbye, to ask if he still loved me. I stayed quiet, letting Wolfe push. You left the scene intact? I did. Then someone arrived before or after you, someone who did not. She hesitated. There was a glass on the floor, and his robe was half open, as if he'd been interrupted. Wolfe nodded. Your fear protected you from guilt, Miss Kessler, but not from consequence. Inspector Kramer didn't like being summoned. He liked it even less when it was by Wolfe. But the mention of tampered evidence and a missing will brought him through our front door just after 7, coat half-buttoned and expression full of thunder. You better not be wasting my time, he said. I never do, Wolfe replied, motioning him in. Sit. I handed him the copy of the diary slip. He read it once, then again, jaw tightening. Where did you find this? Sewn into the lining of Mr. Neal's robe. Hidden? Yes, Wolfe said, and deliberately. Henry feared interruption, or interception. Kramer shook his head. Still doesn't make this murder. Alone, no, but consider the missing will, the removed page, the denial of presence by a witness who now admits to being there. Dalia? She found the body, but did not remove evidence. Kramer looked up. Then who did? That, Wolfe said, is what we shall now demonstrate. He laid out the pattern. Henry's plan to amend his will, The motive to silence him, the false narrative of accident. Kramer didn't interrupt, which was rare. Finally, Wolfe added, Mr. Neal's death was not a crime of passion. It was the culmination of a cover-up that began a decade ago, and the motive is not merely wealth, it is survival. Kramer muttered, You better be right. I always am, Wolfe said. Eventually. Vivien came that evening by invitation. Not that she knew the full purpose of it. She wore black again, a symbol she thought lent gravity to her words. But Wolfe didn't bother with ceremony. Miss Broden, he said, you lied. Her chin lifted. I've told you the truth. Number, you've told me versions, carefully curated. Today we require the original. I came here to defend Henry's memory. No, Wolfe said, you came to protect your own. She turned to Kramer, who stood in the back of the room, arms crossed. Inspector, this man has no authority. Kramer grunted. He's got my ear, for now. Wolfe placed the diary slip on the table. This proves Henry intended to confront someone that night, someone he had once protected. She froze. You feared what he might say, Wolfe continued, feared that he would expose the truth, that he had once lied to shield you, that the embezzlement, the scandal, was yours. That's a lie, she snapped. You benefited from the theft, Wolfe said. You were never charged, but you knew that if Henry amended his will, the past would be exhumed. I didn't touch him. I did not say you did, Wolfe said coolly. But someone erased what he left behind, and that, Miss Broden, is a different kind of crime. The room went still. Vivien's breath hitched. Then she sat, slowly, as if the weight of Wolfe's words pressed her down. I didn't push him, she said. No, Wolfe agreed. But you were there. You heard his confession, you saw the new will, and you took it. Her voice dropped. He told me he was changing everything. Not out of malice, out of guilt, Wolfe said. He carried your burden for 10 years. He believed he owed it to Douglas to correct the lie. I didn't ask him to, she whispered. But you let him, Wolfe said. And when he tried to undo the damage, you made sure his silence endured. Kramer stepped forward. You removed the diary page? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I wanted time, she murmured, to decide what to do. I didn't know he'd fall. You feared what would follow, Wolfe said, that his truth would become your ruin. She didn't speak again. Outside, the city was dark and indifferent. But in that room, the cost of silence had finally been counted, and the debt had come due. Wolfe didn't favor public confrontation unless absolutely necessary. So when he summoned Vivien Broden, James Corwin, Dalia Kessler, and Douglas Neal back to the brownstone, with Inspector Kramer seated like a thundercloud in the corner, I knew something final was being orchestrated. The chairs had been arranged precisely, with the diary slip centered on Wolfe's desk like an exhibit in a museum. Wolfe, of course, didn't rise to greet them. He simply inclined his head slightly and began. You have all, he said, participated, directly or otherwise, in a campaign of concealment. Tonight, we conclude it. No one interrupted him. That in itself was remarkable. You may believe this to be a dispute of grief, or inheritance, or memory. It is not. It is about a mission, deliberate and sustained. Vivien sat with her legs crossed, her eyes cold but attentive. Corwin, next to her, adjusted his tie with a twitch that made his collar jump. Dalia looked drawn, hands folded tight. Douglas seemed the calmest of the group, as if some burden had shifted off his shoulders and now waited to land on someone else's. Wolfe gestured to the diary slip. This line, written by Henry Neal on the night he died, was hidden in his robe's lining, a message not for the world, but for the person he expected that evening. He turned his gaze to Vivien, who didn't flinch. Someone came. Someone he feared, or perhaps pitied. Someone he was finally ready to tell the truth, no matter the cost. Are you accusing me? She asked, voice cool. No, Wolfe replied. I'm naming you." Kramer let out a soft grunt, more sound than approval. And the silence that followed was not protest. It was preparation. Wolfe's hands rested on the arms of his chair. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. For 10 years, he said, Henry Neal carried a lie to protect someone else, not out of love, at least not only love, but out of obligation. That lie involved the embezzlement of funds from the Neal Futures Foundation. It implicated Douglas Neal publicly, but spared the true culprit, Vivien Broden. Vivien straightened. That's absurd. Your financial records, Wolfe said, say otherwise. You received payments routed through a consulting firm, VB Holdings, whose only client, coincidentally, was the Neal Foundation during its final year of full operation. She looked to Corwin, whose expression had gone an unhealthy shade of pale. Henry, Wolfe continued, took the fall quietly. But he kept records, and as his relationship with his brother mended, he began to recognize that shielding you had cost more than his reputation. It had cost his integrity. Vivien's voice trembled, only slightly. If he wanted to expose me, he could have done it at any time.
Ah, Wolfe said, but he did not. He tried to do so gently, through his will. A transfer of assets, a redistribution of guilt in a way that avoided scandal. Douglas, to his credit, stayed silent. Wolfe glanced toward him briefly, then back to Vivien. But that wasn't enough for you, Wolfe said. You knew that if Henry completed that will, questions would follow. Kramer would ask them. I would ask them. And so, the will disappeared. Vivien's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. But I did not kill him, she said. I swear to you. No, Wolfe said. You did something more cowardly. You erased his truth. James Corwin had managed to avoid center stage until now, but Wolfe had a keen sense of timing, and mercy was never part of the act. You were Henry's attorney, Wolfe said to Corwin, and his friend. You helped draft the revised will. Corwin nodded stiffly. You saw it in his desk. You admitted that, but you said nothing to the authorities when it vanished. I thought it wasn't my place, Corwin muttered. I wasn't sure what had happened. You were sure enough to remain quiet. Corwin swallowed. I was protecting client confidentiality. Convenient, Wolfe said, but not convincing, particularly when one considers your firm's long-standing ties to the Neal Foundation. Corwin's face twitched. You were on retainer when the audit scandal broke, Wolfe continued. It was your office that approved the payments to VB Holdings. You signed off on transfers labeled as strategic partnerships. Code, of course, for laundering. Corwin said nothing. You had more to lose than Vivien, Wolfe said. Your firm's reputation, possibly your license. When Henry made clear his intent to revise the will and perhaps expose past wrongs, you panicked. Corwin leaned forward suddenly. I didn't push him. I didn't lay a hand on him. I believe you, Wolfe replied. I think you arrived too late. Vivien had already confronted Henry. Perhaps she left in anger. Perhaps he fell on his own. Corwin's voice cracked. But the will. You took it, Wolfe said, and removed the diary page, not to hurt Henry, but to protect yourself. Corwin's breath caught, and for the first time all evening, Kramer spoke. Obstruction of justice, he said quietly, and accessory after the fact. Corwin didn't protest. He merely looked at the floor, as if seeing a version of himself he had hoped would never return. Wolfe leaned back, templed his fingers, and studied the room. No one spoke. Corwin's face had blanched a few shades past concern. Vivien's was locked in something between indignation and calculation. Wolfe's gaze settled somewhere above all of them, as if addressing not the people, but the puzzle that hovered above them. Let us now examine the order of events, he began, as if presenting a post-mortem on logic itself. Henry Neal wrote his final diary entry, or intended to, the night he died. That page, removed after his death, was later found sewn into his robe. Its contents suggest anticipation of a visit, not merely a visit, but a confrontation. He shifted his eyes to Dalia. Miss Kessler, you arrived at Mr. Neal's apartment at approximately 11:20 p.m. You have admitted as much. Dalia gave a faint nod. You found him dead, Wolfe continued. You panicked and fled. That panic, while foolish, was understandable. She flinched, but did not deny it. Now, Wolfe said, turning toward Corwin, Mr. Neal had shown you the new will just days prior. He told you it would be formalized. Yet the morning after his death, you chose silence. Corwin began, but Wolfe lifted a hand. Number you were calculating. The will had vanished, the diary was incomplete. The timing of your arrival was unclear, until now. He glanced at Kramer. Inspector Saul Panzer followed Mr. Corwin on the night of the death. Mr. Corwin arrived at the apartment building shortly after midnight. He entered through the service door. Kramer sat up. Corwin tensed. I was checking on him. I hadn't heard from Henry. I was concerned. Indeed, Wolfe said. Concerned enough to enter through the back and leave no trace. Concerned enough to notice the will missing or to remove it. Vivien's head turned sharply toward Corwin. Wolfe continued, voice measured. What you saw, Mr. Corwin, was not just a man dead at the base of stairs. You saw a man who, in dying, threatened to implicate you, not by accusation, by restoration, by telling the truth. And at last, the shape of the night had formed, step by silent step. It was one of those moments that could have passed for theatre if Wolfe hadn't loathed such things. But he had a flair for a well-placed detail, and he used it now. He reached into the drawer to his right and removed a slip of paper sealed in a small envelope. Inspector, he said, I believe this warrants your attention. Kramer took it, opened it, and scanned the sheet. Then he looked at Wolfe. What am I seeing?
The diary page, Wolfe said, was written with a specific fountain pen. Ink, Mr. Kramer, varies by manufacturer and formulation. Most of us are content to believe black is black, but not Saul Panzer. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Saul, Wolfe continued, retrieved Mr. Corwin's pen during a fabricated consultation earlier this week. The handwriting analyst has confirmed that the ink used to write the replacement diary page matches that pen precisely. Ink that did not match the other pages of the diary? Replacement? Kramer asked. Yes, Wolfe replied. The page we found was sewn into Henry's robe. The page Corwin produced to the executor's office, allegedly found in Henry's desk later, was a forgery? Written posthumously in ink that did not exist in Henry's study. Kramer stared hard at Corwin. That true? Corwin remained frozen, lips pressed, eyes low. You tried to redirect suspicion, Wolfe said. You removed the authentic page, then created a forgery that implied nothing. No visitor, no confession, no change in will. A dead man conveniently silent. Corwin finally spoke. I was trying to contain the damage, that's all. Wolfe's tone sharpened. Not yours to contain. Corwin said nothing more, and Vivien beside him now looked as if she had been betrayed twice, once by Henry, and now by the man who had tried to help her remain untouchable. The moment broke slowly. Corwin's shoulders sagged, and the stiffness in his spine gave way to gravity. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. I went there to talk, he said, to tell Henry not to go through with it. That changing the will, exposing what had happened, would ruin us both. He didn't threaten you, Wolfe asked. Number not directly, but he wouldn't be dissuaded. And then, Wolfe prompted. Corwin shook his head. I lost my temper. We argued. He told me the past didn't justify the lie anymore. I reached for his arm. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I just wanted to stop him. He stepped back and missed. The fall. It was fast, Corwin said. Sudden. He hit his head on the lower step. He didn't move. And your first thought? Wolfe asked softly. I froze. Then I searched for the will. I found it in the drawer. I took it. I knew if it surfaced, Everything would come out. You fabricated the diary page? Yes, Corwin said. The real one mentioned someone he was expecting. I didn't know who, I just knew it would raise questions. So I wrote a new entry, something neutral. Enough to explain the evening, not enough to implicate anyone. You returned the diary? Yes, to his desk, where the police would find it. Kramer stood slowly. That's obstruction, tampering, evidence destruction, and maybe more. Corwin didn't object. Wolfe leaned back. You did not push him, Mr. Corwin, but your fear did. And perhaps in that moment, the fear looked heavier than guilt. Douglas, who had been silent, turned to Wolfe. If we hadn't found the real diary page, Wolfe folded his hands. Justice is not found in confessions, Mr. Neal. It is hidden in what men try hardest to forget. Douglas Neal returned to the brownstone 2 days after the confession. Not for closure, not even for gratitude. He arrived with a manila envelope in hand and a gaze that had shifted from urgency to quiet resignation. He sat where he had the first time, across from Wolfe, but this time his posture lacked tension. The man had what he came for. Henry's estate was his now. The revised will, validated through Kramer's chain of custody, and a reluctant Corwin's testimony, had held in court. The lawyers were finishing the formalities. But something in Douglas had lost shape. The way a man's shoulders sink, not from grief, but from the confirmation of an old truth he'd tried too long to revise. I have the deed, he said softly, placing it on Wolfe's desk. The property, the accounts, the board seat, you are the heir, Wolfe replied, with no warmth or judgment. Douglas didn't move. He lied to protect her, he said, then died trying to tell the truth. What am I supposed to do with that? Wolfe's gaze didn't shift. Preserve the truth, Mr. Neal, even when it burdens you. It already does. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. That is how you know it matters. Douglas stood. He was a better man than I thought, and a lonelier one. He was both, Wolfe said, because he chose to be. Douglas gave a short nod, left the envelope, and walked out. He didn't look back. The legacy was his, but like all inheritances worth their cost, it came chained to regret. Vivien Broden did not fight the rumors. She didn't file a counterclaim or write a column. She didn't attempt to press defense or summon allies to her side. She simply vanished. Not physically, but socially, which in her circles was a kind of death no one sent flowers for. Her lawyer negotiated her withdrawal from 2 foundation boards. Her name, once connected with the Neal family, now prompted whispered re-evaluations over lunch tables and fundraisers. The verdict wasn't legal, but it was final, the kind that doesn't make headlines, only deletions. Wolfe read the news in passing, sipped his beer, and said nothing. She'll be fine, I said. In a superficial sense, Wolfe replied. But not where it matters, I shrugged. Some people carry guilt like armor, others like skin. She will carry it like glass, Wolfe said, thin enough to shatter but never disappear. Still, I said, it's poetic. She kept her name intact for 10 years and lost it in 10 days. She did not lose it, Wolfe said, turning a page in his book. She spent it. There was nothing more to say. The city would not remember her for her scandals. It would remember her absence, and speak her name less and less until she became a footnote in the lives of better liars. That evening, as Fritz cleared away the remains of dinner, duck braised in rosemary, which Wolfe had savoured with excessive focus, the conversation shifted back, as it often did, to the case. I had tried to steer it toward baseball, but Wolfe was impervious to such distractions. It is curious, he said, folding his napkin, how the human conscience can endure falsehood, provided it was inherited. You mean Douglas? I mean Henry. Wolfe pushed his chair back. He bore a burden that was not his. He wore it until it crushed him, because it allowed the others to walk free. You think that's noble? I think it's inefficient, Wolfe said, but not without purpose. I raised an eyebrow. You admire him? I understand him. Same thing. Number admiration implies consent. Understanding implies restraint. I didn't press it. Wolfe's thoughts on morality were often better left like his orchids, untouched unless you wanted a slow death from disapproval. But I thought of Henry, of the robe, the diary, the missing will, and the image of a man trying to undo a lie, not with vengeance, but with balance. He didn't want revenge, I said aloud. Just restoration. Wolfe gave a slow nod, because he knew what most men do not, that the truth, once buried, is not safely hidden. It festers, and in festering, consumes the one who kept it quiet. That, I thought, was Wolfe's version of empathy, which, coming from him, was practically a eulogy. I'd seen families blow apart before. I'd seen brothers sue each other, mothers write checks to silence daughters, and one case where a cousin tried to drown a parakeet over an inheritance dispute. But this was different. This wasn't about money, not really. It was about the weight of guilt, the longevity of silence, and the illusion that protecting someone from the truth is the same as loving them. Douglas got everything, legally speaking, but he also got the knowledge that his brother had lived in quiet ruin to keep his name clean. That's not a gift, that's a debt you pay in dreams. Vivien left with her reputation tattered but her freedom intact. That's justice with a lowercase j, the kind that doesn't satisfy but doesn't feel unjust either. She didn't kill Henry, but she killed the part of him that believed silence was strength. And Corwin, he got a deal. Cooperation in exchange for disbarment and probation. He'll write financial articles now, or ghostwrite memoirs, or disappear entirely into that strange middle world where disgraced men go when they're too connected to fall completely. Wolfe, as always, went back to his orchids. Fritz polished silver. And I watched Wolfe devour duck and dissect morality like a man judging the peel on an orange. Some things never change, and some cases, the ones about brothers, lies, and the ways people hide love, leave a flavor that even Fritz's wine pairing can't quite rinse from the tongue. Later that night, when the office had gone still and the case had finally folded into memory, Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, the last of the cognac untouched beside him. One man, he said, lied to protect his family. Another died trying to reclaim it. What, Archie, do you suppose is more foolish? I looked up from my notebook. Depends which one slept better. Wolfe gave a faint smile. I suspect neither did. He turned to the window, though he couldn't see through it. He just liked the direction. It is a terrible thing, he said quietly, to be loyal to the wrong truth. That hung in the air like the end of a sermon no one claps for. He reached for the cognac. I didn't say anything else. Some questions don't beg answers. They ask to linger. And some men, like Wolfe, already know the answer. They just prefer to hear it asked aloud. In the quiet that followed, Wolfe didn't speak for a long time. He merely adjusted the orchid lamp beside him and said, almost absently, "It is often not the lie itself that destroys a man, but the silence required to sustain it." Archie, sharpening a pencil with theatrical vigor, muttered, "Tell that to the ones left behind to inherit the silence." And now, I ask you, what do you think was the criminal's greatest mistake, removing the will, or trusting that truth could remain buried? Leave your thoughts below, subscribe for more Nero Wolfe cases, and share this mystery with fellow sleuths.